This is the second half of our program this evening, and I have the privilege to be the moderator with my colleagues who were participants, leaders, and members of the group that left Brown and found sanctuary in Congdon Street Baptist Church. I'm going to ask all of my panelists and the pastor representing Congdon Street Baptist Church to come to the stage. We've heard about this walkout, and we've heard stories about the walkout. We have mythology about the walkout, and we have now some evidence about the walkout, thanks to the curated leadership of Harold and Bernstein Bailey. We have some information that might be validated about the walkout. So we want to thank you both for your leadership in that. But nothing could possibly be exciting as really hearing from folk who walked down that hill or who chose to walk out, period. What was going on with these participants? They each will come to the podium and take a few minutes to reflect on how they think that the Black student activism influenced Brown. Hello, I just get quiet when you talk. So could we not talk so I can talk? Please. You have your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. My sister was one of the walkout
Yeah.
on stage.
Okay, so here's my dilemma. There's several of you that are not on stage, and you see there's no more room on the stage. We will bring everyone else who's a walkout participant on the stage because they're getting a stole. So I love sibling love. Thank you for watching out for her. But, okay. Well, if you go, I see Brenda, you're a Brown graduate. If we go to the live performance tomorrow, you'll see that the women dominate the live performance, and there is the Pembroke version of the walkout being dominated in that scene. So let's be real clear, we're balancing it. We're just starting the weekend. We're just starting. We're just starting. In fact, tomorrow should be exciting because these were interviews of real people, and I interviewed mostly women because I was making a point. So I'm with you. But this point is that men played very prominent roles, and I really found the first 9 walkout participants I could find under the gun because it wasn't easy to find them. Many folk who walked out are hard to find and have not come back. Many of the people who walked out have not come back. So we're really appreciative that these folks have come and have the courage to once more revisit that, because when I conducted my interviews with them, I cried, I heard anger, I heard people go back to places that were painful. So this is not easy. Are you all feeling me? Yes. This is not easy. So I do want to give them another round. Give it to them. 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 See, I was with them, and I could tell, I can look at some of them. I look at the 2 that were seniors when I was a sophomore, and I was doing my thing too, but I looked up to them and I'm like, wow, they're no joke. I looked up and saw some of the men. They are really going to take this university on all day long. We're going back home. We had all kinds of dynamics going, and what we want to do is get a feel of that from their individual reflections. Let me be real clear. What I know from research, and I'm the only one that's done it so far, is that everybody's perspective is unique to theirs. There is no generalization, stereotype of what the journey meant for them. And that's what we're going to ask them to do right now. We're going to ask them to, one by one, come to the podium, give their name, their class, and talk about how their activism affected Brown, but more importantly, how it's affected their own lives. How's it affected their own lives? How has it affected their own lives? Would you like to hear that one by one for just a few minutes? How many want to hear that? Because maybe we can then find some collective truth that can continue to fuel the progress that this president aspires to have in this university today, 50 years later. So I'm going to begin, because I'm not going to talk much more. I've already gotten into a challenge situation, so I need to stop talking. Oh yeah, I go there, right, don't I? I'm going to invite our first participant to come to the, well, you know what? If you got the mic, you don't have to get up. You can just stay cozy, right? You want to do that? Pass the mic. Pass the mic. Let's start. You start. And you know what? Just introduce your name, your class, and you got 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, is this on? Okay.
Yes.
My name is Gary Harris. I was in the class of 1972. I was asked to talk about the impact of the walkout on both, from my perspective, on myself and on the university. Starting with myself, the most immediate impact, I think, was the ability to interact with some of the people on this stage, as well as some others, some names like Spencer Crew, Phil Lord, and others who were upperclassmen when I was here, and probably would not have been able to interact with those individuals in the way that I did if it weren't for the walkout. And many of those individuals probably don't know or appreciate the impact they've had on my life. Secondly, the impact it had was that as a result of the walkout, obviously, there was an increase in the number of black students here at Brown. And that increase made this university a much more attractive, a much more vibrant place for me. Probably the strongest memory I have of the walkout was the pushback that we were receiving from the university, from the administration, and from others. And that pushback was largely based upon the assumption that by increasing the number of blacks at the university, that somehow we would weaken the strength of the class, that we would lower the standards at Brown would be lowered, and that somehow Brown would be adversely affected by having more black students present. And I think that we resisted that by saying that we weren't lowering the standards, that what the university needed to do was to widen their net, that there were students out there, there were black students out there who were more than capable of doing the work, but that the administration was doing their work in the same way they had in the past. They were getting applications through the transom, they were recruiting at the same institutions, and if they opened their eyes and they, as I said, cast out a wider net, they would find that there were many black students who were capable of doing the work. And I think that the achievements, that the accomplishments, that the lives lived that are represented in this room support the assertion that we were making at that time. And then finally, the impact that the walkout had on me, probably the most significant impact. Well, let me back up and say that while here, I was told, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, that during the orientation at Pembroke, which, as you may remember, was the sister school of Brown because the merger had not yet taken place. That at the orientation at Pembroke, among the pertinent facts that was shared was that the fact that 50% of Pembroke women who marry brown men. And I think that's interesting commentary on those times when you recognize that they felt that it was that important to mention that at orientation. But for personal perspective, I like to think that in some small degree, perhaps our participation, which led to greater black enrollment at the university, some degree led to probably the most significant impact in my life, which there's a Pembroker here from the class of 1973 who I spent the last 45 plus years with. And setting aside for the moment all the other political and social effects, that was the most significant impact to me, both from the walkout and from my Brown experience as a whole.
I have to comment because I hear you talking about you really saw the need to soften the stereotypes about black talent and the ability to find it. But I just want to remind you that back in those days, and you all may remember, we Pembrokers had to wear a dress or skirt and go to dinner at a certain time. I mean, it was really archaic. So for those of you that went around, we had to put on a skirt and go to dinner at a certain time.
We couldn't wear trousers.
We had to wear skirts to classes. Oh, it was pretty much. But in 1971, Pembroke and Brown merged, but only after a long, long period of archaic tradition. So let's give them a round again. Glen.
My name is Glen Dixon, class of 70. I was one of the leaders of the walkout at that time. And I've got a few notes because there are some very specific things I want to share. I won't speak long.
4 minutes.
But these are some, I got the message, Sheryl. But
we did that back then.
But these are some important things that I want to make sure I've shared. The element of my experience at the walkout gave me what I call a sense of personal and moral and ethical compass. And I think that's something that you have to experience in order to truly use and implement it. So what does it mean for me as a concerned person in our world to follow the suggestion from one of our greatest filmmakers right now, Spike Lee, who just did a film called Black Klansman. From one of his early films, the title was Do the Right Thing. So what does it mean to do the right thing? It's difficult probably for many of us, but nonetheless, it's based on the presumption that when faced with choices or decisions in our lives, some actions we take may be better than others. Some actions may actually be the right thing. But it's not the same for everybody, nor does it have to be. And during the walkout, there were many participants who had their own idea of what doing the right thing in that circumstance would be. So many years ago, it helped me to decide to seek to determine, especially in difficult or challenging situations, what was the right thing to do. It isn't obvious, and it certainly isn't easy. But in my estimation, it's not my purpose or mission to presume to decide for you or anyone else, unless asked specifically, of course. what the right thing might be in any given situation for another person. That's not our job unless asked or unless it is requested. I do believe, however, it is incumbent upon each of us to take this lesson from our experience in the walkout. Seek to find your own personal, moral, and ethnic compass. For example, you might find your moral compass through or in religion. As a Christian, through Islam, through the Jewish faith, as a Hindu, perhaps even as a Buddhist. You might find it in politics. You might feel that being a Democrat, Republican, independent, communist, socialist, or you might even find some dictators who would say that being a dictator is the right thing to do in that situation. In science, physics, biology, chemistry, mathematics, in business, finance, marketing, entrepreneurship, or generating wealth. Maybe in your situation and your experience, generating wealth is the guide for doing the right thing. It might be in art or creative endeavors, music, painting, writing, film, in healthcare, in education, in many other different things. You want to find a way to determine what your approach to doing the right thing might be. There will always be difficult decisions. So the key lesson I want to share with you, the key nugget of advice, is not to tell you or anyone else what the right thing for you might be, but only to suggest that you find some way, somehow, to determine your right thing with your own moral compass. And then to take a deep breath, hope for the best, believe in yourself, and go out and do it. Go out and with each difficult or challenging decision, try to do the right thing. That's my message for today.
So, and Glen was a very strong figure in the walkout on the Brown side. And so you're talking about the ethical or moral issues that we struggle with down in that church, right? I mean, there was a struggle, and there was a struggle. It was pretty intense. Would you agree, all of you?
Absolutely. The thing that I was concerned about at the end of it was, did we do enough? Did we do enough to create an atmosphere at Brown that would result in a gathering like this? And I think you are evidence that, at least in part, we did as much as we could.
So, Ito, you were a senior during the walkout, right?
Yes, I was a senior.
And she was no joke either. Quiet, pointed, no joke. If you look at the picture, she is no joke. So you tell us what your reflections are, what came out of that, do you think, for the university? You were very admired because you were very focused. What came out of that for you? What happened at Brown? What happened to you?
Well, first of all, as a lot of us have, after we left, my name is currently Ito Jamar. I used to be Judy Fitzhugh. Got rid of that. And I now live in Atlanta. It's, when she asked me to say how it has impacted Brown, other than this, you know better how it has impacted Brown than I, because for a while I didn't want to come back. This is the first time I've been back to a reunion. It was really only because of the walkout that I decided to come back. So thank you for acknowledging that. I really appreciate the education I got here academically, and I've noticed all through my life telling people I'm a Brown graduate means a lot. So I do appreciate that. When I came to Brown, when I applied to Brown, I didn't even know it was an Ivy League school. I'd never heard of Brown. I just somehow liked it when I read about it. But anyway, how did it impact me? I was an applied math major. Everyone will tell you I was quiet, I was studious, I didn't bother anybody, I would go to the library. I was a BSc, Bachelor of Science, applied math student. So when I began awakened to the injustices in the country, it kind of just, you get to the point where you do say, we got to do something. I'd heard, we'd made approaches to Brown before, and they just said, very nice, thank you. You get the sense of feeling we were just a kind of a token, a kind of a, look at the ones we have, how nice they are. So you get to a point, and to be quite honest, I scared myself. I really did, because I didn't know I had it in me. And the other thing that I scared myself was that I was able to convince people, said, my God, you almost get scared when you start telling people what you think, and they kind of agree with you, and then it kind of snowballed. It wasn't just, it was us. It started at Pembroke. The guys at Brown had started things the year before, but we started at Pembroke. Nothing happened. We said, something has got, we can't just accept the fact that they get our letter. And actually, they said, and I tell everybody, they said, Judy, we thought you were such a nice girl. So it was like, coming out of a shell, realizing you have to do something, but almost being afraid of what you feel you have to do, but having no choice, still having to do it. Sometimes you come to a point to realize something has to be done. And so we met, and the females met, and the guys heard about it, and they started waking up again. But I really want to, those of you who see this as a male-female thing, it wasn't about that. We were one community. We were very close. We trusted them, and they trusted us. There were just a few of us. We had to be close. So it wasn't a male-female thing. To be quite honest, after we got the walkout going and we got off campus, we were happy to hand it over to them because, there was a lot of work that still had to be done.
I just want to make sure that you are all aware that the idea of a walkout during a time when Time magazine was showing pictures of our brothers from Cornell carrying weapons into their protest, the idea of the walkout came from Pembroke. It came from our sisters. That made it possible for 65 of us to go.
But I think, though, you and Glen, you've had 2 turns now. So I think that the point, though, you're both making is that it's hard to look back 50 years ago and see it in the context of today, because we really did not have that tension around who did what when.
Yeah, we just had to get it done, and so we just did what we had to do. But the walkout really, we felt, was a way to keep us with the upper hand. We saw people taking over universities, and actually people wanted us to do much more. People, outsiders came in wanting us to do things which would have ended us up in jail, which is, I think, the point. But we just wanted something that would keep us with the upper hand, and I think it was successful.
Yes.
So, I can't even begin to talk about the impact that this has on my life because it's ongoing. I won't even try to touch that. But anyway, it's been, you kind of live your life and do a lot of different things. But I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to see all of you.
And Gail, you were also senior. These are young people. Flashback, they're like really teens, early 20s, maybe 17 to about 21. That's who they were, having these kinds of interactions. So Gail, you were a senior too.
Yes.
Another one I looked up to. So what happened for you?
Well, yes, I'm Gail DaCosta, and Pembroke, Brown 69. And in terms of how the walkout impacted me, some of it's been said already. I was kind of like Ida, very quiet, and in fact, I told Sheryl this on the phone, that I never saw myself as a leader or a rabble-rouser or anything like that. But as Ito said, it got to the point where we just felt that something had to be done. And I was scared. We did not know what was going to happen. So, I mean, we had absolutely no way of knowing what was going to happen in the next few days or few weeks, let alone what would happen down through the years. So we were, I was scared. I was scared of what my parents were going to say. It's like, I don't know when I told them about this or how they found out. But in the end, it was what Glen said, that it was the right thing to do. And so once we decided, that was it. We were going to do what we thought was the best that we could do. And it was a very different, Brown was very different, as you know, my colleagues have alluded to. You know, we could count the number of black students. We all knew each other. And so, yes, we had very close bonds, and that was certainly one impact, because we all were close. And so I think, you know, through the years, that's kind of how I've still operated, that quietly I'm going to do the right thing. May not make a big noise about it, but I'm going to do the right thing. When something is wrong, I'm going to speak up and try to do the right thing.
You know, Gail, I was struck because nowadays, if this happened, because of social media, it would have gone viral and your mother would have known in 10 minutes.
I know. You're right.
Different time.
That's right. That's right. I think our picture came out on the cover of the Brown magazine, and my parents saw that. I went, oh goodness. But yeah, I also told Sheryl when she interviewed me that the details, a lot of the details have faded, to be honest, over 50 years. So a lot of them I don't exactly remember, but I do remember the feelings. We had a real sense of camaraderie among us. I remember that in the church, that feeling. We were in this together, and we were going to, you know, stick it out together. And, you know, it didn't matter who was speaking or whatever, but we were in it together. And so in terms of how it's impacted Brown, this is just, you know, I don't think in our wildest dreams we ever would have predicted that Brown would look the way it does today. We just didn't have a clue. But it's kind of like our society. We can look back and see that, oh, we've come a long way, although we know we still have a long way to go. So.
Thank you. Hey, Ken.
My name is Kenneth McDaniel, class of '69, and I was a spokesperson for the Black Student Walkout. Everything that I was allowed to say was well scripted, reviewed, in print by the negotiators and some other senior folks involved. Now I'm free.
But you can't remember anything.
I've got some alternate facts. I guess what I'd like to start with is what I learned, in part about myself. I was one of those folks who call parents before the walkout, partly because my father was an instructor at a land-grant college and could lose his job if things went the wrong way. What I learned from the conversation with my father, he very quickly went through pretty much our old checklist. Have you thought about other ways to do this? Have you thought it through? Is this the right thing to do? And that was always the term. And I said, yes. He said, then you have to go ahead and do it. My mother was on another phone line. And as soon as he said, go ahead and do it, she said, boy, what's the matter with you? But in any case, the point learned there was what he had been saying to me up to that point in my life about how you make decisions and move forward, he meant it. The second thing that I learned relates to something that I want to read to you because I think it will set it up very, very well. When historians ponder Brown's transition from a small and comfortable university college to the university it is today, they will inevitably seek out those visionaries who initiated this transformation. Certainly there have been charismatic academics, far-sighted and courageous administrators, and creative researchers who materially aided in this institutional maturation. But there were others, exerting no visible leadership other than moral, who motivated a striking change in the character of this campus. One of those moral leaders was the Reverend Charles A. Baldwin II,
Yes.
Brown's chaplain from 1958 to 1990. President Barnaby Keeney, who was deeply impressed with Baldwin's rhetorical skills and with his fervent belief in a proactive religion, named him university chaplain with the mandate that he abide by his conscience, speak his mind, and let the president's office worry about the possible consequences. The connection is that Charles Baldwin was helping to frame the relationship between Brown and Tougaloo prior to this walkout. Tougaloo, for those of you who don't know, was a focal point for civil rights leaders nationwide because they were not a land-grant college. So civil rights leaders could meet on that campus without fear of endangering the future life of that particular institution. Charlie Baldwin basically built up the same mindset within the rest of the folks in the chaplain's office. And the person in particular that I remember was Canon Crocker. During the walkout, I and Canon Crocker would meet every night to find out what was being said in faculty meetings, what was the tone among the students, and giving advice to stay the course. I look back and realize that Charles Baldwin and Canon Crocker could speak the language of the faculty and may have had an impact on the outcome as it occurred. And what I learned from that and from some other things is that very often people that see you being true to whatever purpose may help you in ways that you don't recognize at the time. The third thing that I learned, because of the work that we had been doing for the prior 2 years in Afro-American society meetings and all of the attempts at recruiting and collecting statistics and the like, so that at the point of the walkout, the negotiators had a lot of background information as to what occurred, what had been promised, where there was no follow-through, and the like. There was an absolute wall between this spokesperson and the negotiators because we didn't want to contaminate in any direction what was occurring. two major administrators came down from Brown to do the negotiating, Stoltz and Mader, both with heavy Germanic accents, coming down to talk to Negro students about this walkout stuff that was really embarrassing to the university. And the negotiators would have to verify this, but ultimately it was that I think we had our numbers together and not just out on a passion mission. Stoltz and Mader, as I understood it, you might say were humiliated, embarrassed, whatever, because the administration had not provided them the background information that we had. I think after that first negotiation meeting, they got up, went back to the university. Nobody reported it, but I pretty much am sure they read the Riot Act to a number of folks in the administration. Third lesson was, before you step out with something, really get as much information as possible. We had basically 2 to 3 years worth of information, direct work with the admissions office, going out on recruiting trips. I think we had published a Black Impressions booklet for recruiting of students in the year prior to that. So I'll end there. There's just a lot of learning that occurred that turns out to be very useful in the long term, but I was a very slow learner. I'd have to wait until looking back to see how others had helped whatever situation I was involved with. And I could not make the things happen by myself, but you will keep going forward and try to continue doing what you wanted to accomplish.
So what you're hearing is that we were very strategic and heavyweights around research and evidence-based tactics. So that the perception that it was primarily a righteous emotional appeal with demands is not the case. Much more complicated than that. And since you've taken up everybody else's time now, we're gonna move to the next one. Zilpha. Thank you.
I'm Zilpha Pryor Bell, class of '72, philosophy major. So I was a freshman when the Black Student Walkout took place. I'm going to talk first about the impact that I think the walkout has and had on the university. Now, when it comes to expressing truths clearly, concisely, and with the utmost simplicity, children's stories are hard to beat. Recently, I read to my grandchildren a book by David Ezra Stein entitled Because Amelia Smiled. It begins with, because Amelia smiled coming down the street, Mrs. Higgins smiled too. She thought of her grandson Lionel in Mexico and baked some cookies to send him. Lionel ate one of the cookies, then decided to share the rest with his class and teach them an English song about cookies. And so the story continues with kind acts circling the globe until one day, Pigeon Man is the recipient of an act of kindness. And feeling good, he decides to let his birds out, and Amelia sees them and smiles. This story captures the kind of impact that the 1968 Black Student Walkout had and continues to have on Brown University, an impact that can't be calculated. There are figures and statistics, I have no doubt, on how many students of color have graduated and what they're doing now, but how do you measure what it means to a student who's come from a predominantly Black environment and is now in a predominantly white environment, learning how to prepare, how to be educated for life? Or consider a white student who's only known white friends. They've come from that white environment, and for the first time ever, they have the opportunity to socialize and develop relationships with those of other ethnicities. That's an impact that can't be calculated. And what's the ripple effect of getting to know people of other races as people? The Brown graduate in the work world is a fairer and more open-minded person. In the neighborhood, the Brown graduate is more accepting and welcoming of racial diversity. At large, the Brown graduate will likely evaluate other people based on their individuality. To me, this is the most valuable impact of the Black Student Walkout generally. It brought and continues to bring people of other races, of different races, in contact with one another, where they already share the common goal of acquiring an exceptional education. This redounds to Brown's credit. It reflects well on Brown University. Since 1968, those results are immeasurable, like when Amelia smiled. Now, I can more easily determine how the Black Student Walkout affected my own life. I grew up as the token Black. My father was in the military for the first 13 years of my life, and wherever we moved, I was usually the first Black to attend the school. This was in the 50s and the early 60s, before the civil rights movement began in earnest. In high school, there were 2 of us Blacks out of a class of over 200 students. So my exposure to Blacks and to Black culture was extremely limited. When I arrived at Brown in 1968, there were 85 of us out of several thousand students, and I was shocked. Who knew that there were so many Black people at an Ivy League university? So when they started talking about evacuating campus because there were not enough of us here, I honestly didn't get it. I was concerned about missing classes. And remember, that was the year that Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. It was the year that Bobby Kennedy was killed. So I was also afraid. This was not within the realm of my expectations for my freshman year at Brown University. But as I listened to the upperclassmen, like Sheryl, she was Grooms then, Sheryl, Grooms, Chapman, Brissett Chapman. As I listened to Sheryl, you know, Sheryl would talk, and we'd sit around in the dorm room, the females talking about walking out, and I listened, and Sheryl talked. Sheryl good at talking, and I realized that there was a cause, and I realized that it was just. I never felt that Blackness was something that I should embrace. The discussions we had while we were camped out in the church during the Black Student Walkout awakened a desire in me to embrace my Blackness. The walkout was a pivotal point in my life. I began to see my race as something that I should genuinely feel good about. And so I jumped headfirst into all things Black. All things. I was in Rights and Reasons too.
I remember.
It was heady and it was exciting, but sometimes it was overwhelming. And I'll be honest, sometimes it was just overwhelming. And when I look back on it honestly, I'm thankful that I was here at Brown, because when I needed a cushion to fall on, and I needed a cushion sometimes, the university proved to be a warm, fuzzy nest for me. A few years after graduating, the dust finally settled in my life, and a career in environmental law was a comfortable fit for me because it allowed me to make a difference for people across racial lines. Looking back on the walkout of '68, my role was small. Honestly, I was just a warm body walking. But 50 years later, it's gratifying to have been part of an event that was groundbreaking, both for Brown University and for me. Thank you.
Zilpha, you can talk too, girl. Your philosophy shows brilliant. Thank you.
I'm Ken Grooms, and I am Cheryl's younger brother, and I'll say it at the outset, I had no choice in the walkout. Whatever Sheryl said to the sisters, I heard on my end over and over and over again. As Zilpha said, this 1968 was a year of turmoil and a year of uncertainty. Dr. King's death, Bobby Kennedy's death, the riots in Chicago during the Democratic Party. So when I arrived on campus, I was full. I was 17-year-old, full with the enthusiasm. I was prepared. I'd been academically well prepared to deal with the rigors of Brown. I was not prepared to deal with the social culture of Brown. I told Professor Hamlin's class, my second week there, I said, we're going to have a party in my room. I invited everybody from Fox Point and Providence. No, let me tell you, the dorm had a meeting the next night and said, that's not what we do here. Rude awakening. So I'll be honest with you, they may be a little bit different, I'll be honest with you. When I walked off campus, I was extremely apprehensive because my draft board just waited for me to not be in college. In fact, when I graduated from Brown, 2 months after I graduated, I got my draft induction notice. In my draft center, every black man went into the service. So I was really apprehensive about what was going to happen if I didn't return to Brown. That was number one. However, I was uplifted by these sisters here. You saw in your program the pictures. You see the pictures on the first 2 pages? These are the sisters. Look at their faces. They were determined. They were focused. They had a vision. And they were committed. And they said to us, if you can't hang with us, in the vernacular of the 60s, these were bad sisters. Bad sisters. So the first lesson I took from that was you have to have passion. You have to have passion about your commitment to service and changing the organization and institution that you find yourself in, wherever it may be at the time. Secondly, just as Ken McDaniel said, I learned that they were strategic, collecting information, discussing in excruciating and nauseating detail about tactics and strategies. But I realized later on in life that they gave everybody an opportunity to participate and to be heard. So we had multiple perspectives. We had different perspectives, but it allowed everybody to put on the table and give us the benefit of their perspectives. They were strategic. I told Professor Hamlin's group the other day, and you mentioned it, the 2 negotiators from the university had thick German accents. And I remember sitting across the table from them saying, I can't believe it. They have thick German accents are obviously immigrants, and they're going to deny us an opportunity to fully participate in the benefits of an educational experience at Brown. That was fundamentally unjust. It was a contradiction that we had to address from that standpoint. The brothers were very, very good about strategizing and being able to implement tactics which would reinforce the strategies. For example, they spent a lot of time on 11% black students, 11% administration, money, funding, Africana studies. And so I believe it was Ken or Glen said, why don't we just ask for soul food in the cafeteria? now you laugh, right?
You laugh, but that was
But
real.
Mater, the provost, and Mater, not Mater, what was it? Stoltz, they didn't understand that. They didn't understand why that was important to us. And that just flipped them out. They just couldn't say, well, why do they want to have soul food? Well, what is soul food? Right? Be strategic. Collect your information. Be organized. The third thing was, and I only have one more after this, the third thing was I felt when I walked down the hill, because I'm like saying I'm 17 years old, I just got here, and now they're saying, it's time to go. That led a lot of contradiction in my mind. I couldn't quite understand it. What do you mean, it's time to go? I just got here. They were seniors. They were going to leave anyways. But I remember walking into the church, Pastor, walking into the church, and I could feel myself saying, we are part of a movement, how befitting it is and how appropriate it is that the black church will welcome us and create a safe haven for us. It was a continuation of how the black church has always supported those in need. And then lastly, on a personal note, I realized when that was over, I was very, very, very upset with Brown. So my sophomore year, we all left early because of the student strikes. We left in April. My junior year, see you later, I went to Tougaloo. Best thing I ever did, I worked on nation building with the RNA, Republic of New Africa, and I did voter registration. Now remember, doing voter registration in 1970, you got arrested every single day, okay? But I learned about what it is to put into practice your commitment and your ability and your willingness to sacrifice. And then lastly, I did like Zilpha in my last year. I decided I couldn't act a lick, but I'm gonna be in Rights and Reason, which I enjoyed that experience. For me, that experience in the Brown Walkout has resulted, I ended up having a passion to be an advocate for folks as a civil rights attorney, because I really felt that we still have a continuing need to deal with injustice and inequality in so many forms. Thank you.
Yes, the mic's on. And Dan, you're our last walkout participant before we hear from our pastor.
Well, being last, I'll be very brief. I should say I can't speak for everybody. I had no idea when we left the church and substantially concluded the negotiations with the university. I had no idea, no dream that 50 years later, people would even still be talking about it. I could have guessed maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, but 50 years later. And that says, to me, a lot about what you guys and ladies have done with the foundation that was there and how you've raised it to a new heights and kept it as at the forefront at Brown, not letting Brown slip back into where it was when we were coming along. In the I'm Dan Thompson, I'm from Atlanta, I'm sorry, class of 1970. My class, to give you a feel for the context that we were dealing with, my class had 7 men. 7. Oh, let me come to that. Wait a minute. 7 men in that class. And at Pembroke, there really was only one black woman. One black woman. There were 2 black women genetically, but one of them decided to pass as white. And we said, okay, I mean, if that's what you want, you know. but I think we had the worst numbers picture of any of the classes maybe since the World War II, but it was pretty bad. I'm not going to talk about what it means to the university, and I'm only going to take a few minutes because you all are better judges of that than I am. But I will talk about the 2 things that it meant to me. Sheryl asked me to think about how it affected my life. One is it taught me how to deal with intensity. And many people here have used other words, but intensity is how I say it. It conveys the same thing. And the other, I learned the importance of being open-minded when you're in a negotiation. Being open-minded, nobody is going to be 100% right all the time, and you got to set, to a degree, your ego aside. Now, on that second one, you don't signal that to the other side. You don't let the other side know that. I mean, you look, really, really, really tough. But those were 2 principles that I took away from the negotiations that we had with the university. The intensity was enormous. I had never experienced any, of course I was only 20 or so, but I had never experienced or imagined the intense feelings, the fear that we experienced at that time, walking down that hill. And oh, by the way, while I'm thinking of it, walking down the hill, somebody commented on this, but it's correct. Ito is the lady who came to me before the walkout and said, Dan, we're going to walk out, we being the Pembroke, and you guys can come with us if you want. So we appreciated the invitation. But back to the intensity. We were united on the goal. We all had the same ultimate vision of where the university needed to be. But the university was so out of whack, and maybe it was the whole Providence area, because there are a lot of black folk here now in school, but in those days we'd all sit at the same lunch table. And did you? Okay. And so white guys would come up to me sometimes and say, "Why do you black guys sit together at the lunch table?" And it hadn't occurred to me that was, it was just natural. And then there was a story, front page story in the Providence Journal, a picture of us sitting at the same table. And I said, well, why don't they take a picture of the white guys sitting at the same table? But anyhow, we bonded on the goal. We didn't always bond on the tactic, the next step. And somebody else had mentioned this. We had many different ideas about how to do what. And so we had a lot of hashing out to do, and hashing out in the basement of the church. And it wasn't always pretty because of the pressures that we felt. I'm from a small town in Alabama, and those of you that know Bill Poole, he's here somewhere. in central Alabama, Tuskegee. And if I had gotten kicked out of Brown, everybody in town would know. And my family would have been very embarrassed. My parents had worked very hard to be able to afford to send me to Brown. And for me to throw it back in their face like that, which is how it likely would have been seen, if not by my parents, certainly by the community, that wouldn't have been too very great. So that was the pressure that we were dealing with, but the mechanics were not always pretty. And as a result, we had this component of fear. So I tried to deal with it by keeping myself paced and by not letting my mind run out of control and slowing my emotions and my thoughts at the right time so that everything wouldn't be running through my head out of control. And I found when I started my career that when I got into stressful, intense negotiations, did the same thing. And it had the same very positive result. And then the second and final thing was about being open-minded, because you're never going to be 100% right. We had tough negotiations with the university administrators, and there was one guy in particular who I know Phil Lord will remember, and Glen Dixon, a German guy, Mader. I think he was assistant provost. And one of the last negotiations in the president's office, there were some other places after that, but one of the last ones in the president's office, they were asking, what do you want here, here, and here, A, B, and C? And we said, well, yeah, we want A and B and C. And they said, okay, well, we can work with that. We can work with you guys on that. And then, however, we saw we were kind of on a roll. And so we said, well, we also want D, because we really thought D was right. We didn't think it was really necessary. They'd make a big difference. But while we were getting stuff, why not get D? And Mader, and Glenn, I know you'll remember this. Mader, in his very thick German accent, 24 years after World War II, said, "You go too far." And he stood up and said it, "You go too far." And the room got quiet, but it was an icebreaker. The mask had come off. And we saw, and I think the administrators saw, that, okay, now we can really just deal with each other because we know where we are and we know they know where we want to go. And on D, we dropped it. We didn't cling to our ego and think, well, we had to win that too. We thought that we got what we needed and put it on a schedule of when we need it, when we would need it. And that was enough for then. If we recognized that there were going to be other things that needed to be done. Glenn talked about not doing enough, but we recognized that we'll have other opportunities to do it. And now the university, which had not taken us seriously, had not taken the ladies at Pembroke seriously, now they were awake. And you could see that in their eyes. And had we not recognized that we needed to set our egos aside in that last session, I don't think we would have gotten resolved as quickly as we did. So those are the two things that I learned, and I just thank God that I was able to be part of it.
We're beginning to wind down, but Dan, you did learn how to take command of a podium too. It's excellent. So these are the walkout participants, and there are, as you know, many more. And you probably heard each one of them brought a very unique perspective. I would suggest there probably are 65 perspectives for those folks who participated back in 1968. But we like to have a partner, a safe haven, a sanctuary, a missionary, a minister to come to the podium. Would you like to sit there? Why don't you sit there and stay with the group? You want to stay with the group?
I feel important up here, so yeah.
You feel important up there?
Yes.
Because
yes.
you have 3 minutes, Pastor.
I have 3 minutes? No, I have 3 football minutes, right? I have
Because we know Baptist pastor. I'm a Baptist granddaughter of a minister, okay? I know how this works. And I can see you've been fascinated with this.
I have been.
So could you introduce yourself and give your
comments
comments about what it's meant for your congregation?
Yes, my name is Justin Lester. I'm privileged to serve as the pastor of Congdon Street Baptist Church. I'm 30. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm 30, so my parents didn't even meet yet when you guys did this. So I wasn't around at that time, but we have a number of members who were there. Can I do 2 things? First of all, so I am, like you mentioned, I'm a Baptist preacher, right? There's something amazing that happens when we remember our stories, and I think there are times to remember our stories as well. And so, can I pray? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Can I pray? Because it's a wonderful thing to remember our stories, but I also recognize there's a lot of dangerous things that come up. And so I want to pray for your minds and the minds of those here, if that's cool. So, God, we're grateful for this moment and this time of community, and with everything that we've remembered, everything that we've shared, everything that this unearthed, everything that this reminded us of. I pray a special covering over our minds, God, and not just a special covering over our minds so that we can hold it, but a special covering over our minds that we can go out and continue to plant seed for the future. Thank you for the seed that was planted some 50 years ago, and thank you that we're able to see the trees, the forests that have been birthed with all of the people gathered in this space. So we're grateful for this opportunity to engage, to remember, and use us to remember, to reassemble, to go out into the world and continue to fight for those who have their voices silent, to continue to go out into the world and to fight against injustice, to stand strong, and to be the people you've called us to be. It's in your name we pray and we praise. Everyone said, amen. Thank you. So let me say this. So Paul talked about this in 2 Corinthians. There is this treasure in earthen vessels, and when we cast down that vessel, that lamp, right? He says it's cast down, but it's not destroyed. And it makes me think about our congregation. We're celebrating 200 years next year, and a wonderful part of our 200-year-old history is that there was a treasure that you all brought to us, that no matter what has happened over 200 years, whenever life has wanted to cast down black and brown bodies or black churches, you guys have given us so much strength as a chapter in our story that when anything can try to cast us down, baby, we ain't gonna be shattered. And so I'm so very grateful for the chapter you added to our story, and that we have students now that attend our congregation that have continue to talk about the power that you all, and the reason they're even there is because of what you all fought for. And so we're so very grateful, and I'm so very grateful as someone who aspires to fight for black and brown bodies, to be someone to not just go out to look at something else, to have to look at what someone did down south, be able to look at the community that I live in, to look at the walls, the stories in our floorboards, and know that it was you all that stood there and fought for those individuals, to look at the stories in our floorboards and the stories in our windows, and to know that you guys looked out from there to look over something, to say the same way that Jesus wept over Jerusalem, you wept over the future generations. And as Terry Tempest Williams says, the eyes of the future looking back at us, praying for us, in essence, that we don't screw this thing up. I'm one of the eyes of the future looking back at you saying, thank you so much that you did what God called you to do. So I'm so very grateful, so very grateful. Yes, come on. Bless the Lord for them. Come on. Thank you. And so what it meant for our congregation, it has been a wonderful thing. I remember reading the story about it, hearing the stories from some of our seniors. We have this amazing seniors lunch on Tuesday. They're my favorite people. I'm 65 on Tuesdays from 11 to 12, and then I go back to 30. But it's my favorite group of individuals, and we talk constantly about what this means. And next year, as we celebrate our 200th, continuing to make sure we can continue to talk about our part of the story. And really, Jesus talks about, come unto me, all ye that are heavy labor, and cast your cares upon me. And so we're grateful that we were able to be the hands and feet of Christ for black and brown bodies in 1968, and now that God is still continuing to use us until today. So thank you for the seeds you sowed, and thank you that you can see the trees in the forest here, and I can't wait for when you become a part of that great cloud of witnesses, and when I'm there too, we can keep looking down and continue to see the forest that continues to spread across this country. So thank you, and God bless you.
Well, Pastor, we have some offerings for you, but before we do that, these were just a handful of very important, influential members of the Walkout. This idea of doing the recollection, Pastor, was his idea. He said that our new president, a co-founder of IPC, he said, let's do the reunion around 50-year celebration. And so the idea of recollection, thank you for your words to remind us of how biblical that is, how powerful that is, only if we're prayerful. So thank you for those remarks. We have a gift for you. I'm going to give that to you, and then I want to invite everyone who participated in the walkout to join, because we have stoles that we'd like to give to you. This is So could I have all the walkout participants who are in the house to please join us? And Russell and I will convey the stole. All of the walkout participants. We have just a little bit more to do. We're almost through. We get back to having fun with the music and the liquor. But just bear with me. How many of you agree that it was important to hear each of their voices tonight? How many of you agree that we must value each other's voices, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to have a passing of the plate for Congdon. We're going to pass the plate while you stand and while you sing the Negro National Hymn. I'm going to ask Ms. Catania to come and lead us, okay? Can you come and lead us, Ms. Catania? And get your money out. We're going to pass the plate. It's going to go straight to their hands.
All right, you guys, everybody's standing already. There are lyric sheets on your tables. If you don't recall, and I believe we're just going to sing the first and third verse, so we're going to work it out that way. Hey. All right, y'all. Can the band start? Go ahead. Come on, y'all. Here we go. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Let's do the third verse, guys. God of our weary, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Come on, lest our feet stray from the places